In a world where privilege often dictates belonging, Malcolm Rivers steps onto a first-class flight as a symbol of resilience and achievement. A successful African-American architect, his presence challenges societal stereotypes about race and class in spaces of exclusivity. Beside him sits Sarah Whitmore, whose entitled disdain quickly surfaces when she questions whether Malcolm truly belongs in this elite environment. Her biting remark about diversity quotas sparks an escalating conflict that exposes deep-seated prejudices among passengers and crew alike. As tensions rise, the luxurious cabin becomes a microcosm of broader societal divisions, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about bias and inequality. For Malcolm, this moment is more than personal. It's a reflection of years spent navigating systemic racism and proving his worth in spaces not designed for people like him. Amidst the chaos, Captain Elena Torres emerges as a voice of authority and justice, setting the stage for a transformative confrontation. What begins as a single act of prejudice evolves into a powerful exploration of identity, solidarity, and the courage to challenge societal norms. The hum of the airplane cabin filled the air, a soft murmur beneath the polished surfaces and muted gold lighting. Passengers moved with quiet purpose, settling into their seats like pieces fitting into an exclusive puzzle. The first-class section gleamed with understated luxury. Leather seats that hugged you just right, trays laid out with precision, and attendants who glided silently, their smiles practiced but distant. It was a world where wealth and status weren't just implied, they were expected. Yet beneath the surface of this pristine environment, something simmered. An invisible tension, a hierarchy unspoken yet deeply felt. Malcolm Rivers stepped aboard, his presence commanding even before he spoke. He wore a tailored navy suit, its lines sharp enough to cut through any doubt about his belonging here. His movements were deliberate, calm, each step radiating confidence. This wasn't luck or charity, it was earned. Every detail of his life had been building toward moments like this. Recognition for groundbreaking work, invitations to spaces once closed to people like him. As he slid into his seat by the window, he allowed himself a small, private smile. But it faded quickly as he noticed the woman beside him shift uncomfortably. Sarah Whitmore glanced at Malcolm out of the corner of her eye, her lips pursed. She adjusted her designer scarf, tucking it closer around her neck as if shielding herself from some unseen chill. Her gaze flickered over him, his dark skin, his confident posture, and lingered too long. A crease formed between her eyebrows, faint but unmistakable. "You're in first class?" she muttered under her breath, not quite loud enough for others to hear, but clear enough for Malcolm to catch every word. Must be one of those diversity quotas. Malcolm stiffened, though only slightly. Years of navigating rooms where he didn't belong, or wasn't supposed to, had taught him how to hide his reactions. Still, her words landed like stones, skipping across water, disturbing the calm he'd worked so hard to maintain. He clenched his jaw, feeling the muscles tighten along his jawline. His mind raced, replaying other moments like this one. The teacher who told him architecture wasn't realistic for someone from your background. The client who questioned whether he was the lead designer on a project. Each memory layered onto the present, making Sarah's comment feel heavier than it should have. "What did you say?" Malcolm asked finally, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Sarah blinked, caught off guard by his directness. For a moment she hesitated, then leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms. "I just think it's interesting, that's all," she said, louder now, her tone dripping with condescension. "First class isn't exactly common for everyone." Key words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Around them, passengers froze mid-conversation, pretending not to listen while their eyes darted toward the source of the disturbance. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Others exchanged glances, silently debating whether to intervene. A man 2 rows ahead cleared his throat loudly, breaking the silence. But no one spoke. Malcolm took a slow, measured breath. "Interesting," he repeated, leaning forward slightly, His voice carried a weight that made Sarah flinch. You mean because I'm black? Her face flushed, but she didn't back down. I didn't say that, she snapped, though her voice wavered. But since you brought it up, the ripple effect spread quickly. Nearby passengers began whispering among themselves, their voices low but urgent. One woman shook her head disapprovingly at Sarah, while another nodded in agreement. An older man seated across the aisle leaned over to Malcolm. Ignore her, he said gruffly. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Others chimed in, some defending Malcolm, praising his accomplishments. Didn't you design that housing project downtown? Incredible work. While others echoed Sarah's sentiment, revealing their own biases. The flight attendants hovered nervously, unsure how to mediate without appearing biased themselves. Malcolm sat still, his hands resting on his knees, knuckles white. He could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him, dissecting him, judging him. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was bigger than her narrow-mindedness. It was about every time someone had doubted him, dismissed him, tried to make him feel smaller. And yet, as anger bubbled within him, another thought surfaced. A quieter, steadier voice reminding him of why he was here. Not because of quotas or handouts, but because he had fought for this seat, this moment, this life. As the whispers grew louder and the tension thicker, Malcolm realized something crucial. This wasn't just personal. It was symbolic. It was the kind of moment that forced people to choose sides, to confront their own beliefs. And maybe, just maybe, it was an opportunity, not just for him, but for everyone watching, to challenge the unspoken rules of a world built on exclusion. Malcolm's mind drifted back to a time when the world seemed smaller, its boundaries defined by narrow expectations. He remembered sitting in a middle school classroom, his hand raised hesitantly after the teacher asked students what they wanted to be when they grew up. An architect, he'd said, his voice barely above a whisper. The room fell silent, for a beat before laughter erupted, snickers from classmates and a dismissive shake of the head from the teacher. That's quite ambitious, she replied with a tight smile. Maybe something more practical would suit you better. Then Malcolm knew it wasn't about practicality. It was about who got to dream big. Over the years, those doubts followed him like shadows. In college, professors questioned whether he truly understood the complexities of design, suggesting maybe he should consider transferring to a less competitive program. At networking events, clients assumed he was an assistant rather than the lead designer on major projects. Each slight chipped away at his confidence, leaving scars that never fully healed. Now, Sarah's words echoed through his thoughts, reopening old wounds. Diversity quotas. The phrase looped endlessly in his mind, each repetition stoking anger and doubt. Did she really believe he didn't belong here? Or was this just another way of saying people like him didn't deserve spaces like this? His hands gripped the armrests tightly as he wrestled with the urge to confront her. Part of him wanted to demand answers, to force her to see him, not as a stereotype, but as a person. But another part reminded him that silence could be its own form of power, a quiet refusal to let her define him. The tension rippled outward, infecting the cabin like a spreading stain. Passengers whispered behind cupped hands, their divided opinions creating invisible fault lines. A woman across the aisle leaned over to Malcolm, her voice low but earnest. I've seen your work. You're incredible. Don't let her get to you. Her words carried warmth, but they were quickly drowned out by others siding with Sarah. She has a point, muttered a man nearby. First class is expensive, not everyone can afford it. Flight attendants exchanged nervous glances, their movements stiff and mechanical as they avoided eye contact with both Malcolm and Sarah. One attendant hovered near the galley, biting her lip as if debating whether to step in. Another shot her a warning look, shaking his head almost imperceptibly. It was clear. No one wanted to risk taking sides. Malcolm noticed their hesitation and felt a surge of frustration. This wasn't just about Sarah. It was about systems, designed to protect privilege, even at the cost of justice. As the debate swirled around him, Malcolm found himself thinking of his father. a man of few words but infinite wisdom. His dad had always encouraged him to keep pushing forward no matter how hard the road became. "You can't change people's hearts, son," he used to say, "but you can build bridges strong enough to hold them." Those words came rushing back now, grounding him in a moment of chaos. Bridges, not walls. Connections, not divisions. Slowly, Malcolm unclenched his fists, letting the memory steady his breathing. If there was anything he could do right now, it was to rise above, to show grace under pressure. And then, allies began to emerge. An older woman seated behind Sarah turned to face her squarely. "Excuse me," she said sharply, "but I think you owe this man an apology. He's accomplished more in his lifetime than most of us ever will." Another passenger chimed in, recounting their own experience of being judged unfairly because of their accent. These voices weren't loud, but they were firm, cutting through the hostility like sunlight breaking through clouds. For the first time since boarding the plane, Malcolm felt a flicker of solidarity, a reminder that he wasn't alone. But the tension continued to escalate. Sarah's defensiveness grew sharper, her tone rising as she doubled down on her initial remarks. "I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking," she snapped, drawing gasps from several passengers. Malcolm remained silent, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with her agitation. The air crackled with unresolved energy, every word hanging heavy in the space between them. Just as it seemed the situation might spiral out of control, the cockpit door swung open. Captain Elena Torres stepped into the aisle, her presence commanding immediate attention. The cabin fell silent as Captain Elena Torres emerged, her uniform crisp and her expression unwavering. She stood tall, exuding an authority that demanded respect but also carried a quiet compassion. Her eyes swept across the passengers, taking in the charged atmosphere before landing on Malcolm and Sarah. For a moment she simply observed, allowing the weight of her presence to settle over the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. "I understand there's been some disagreement here, and I want to address it directly." She paused, letting her words sink in. "This flight, and every space we occupy, is built on principles of equality and mutual respect. No one should ever feel unworthy because of who they are or where they come from." Her gaze shifted briefly to Sarah, then lingered on Malcolm, offering him a subtle nod of acknowledgement. "As someone who has faced my own share of prejudice in this industry," she continued, "I know how deeply these moments can affect us, but I also believe they present opportunities for growth, for understanding, and for change." Malcolm felt a lump rise in his throat. There was something profoundly validating about hearing those words spoken aloud, especially by someone in a position of power. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about everyone who had ever been made to feel small or unseen. Around him, passengers exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement, others looking down as if reflecting on their own biases. Captain Torres took a step forward, her tone firm but measured. "If anyone feels uncomfortable sharing this cabin with any passenger, regardless of the reason, you're welcome to disembark before takeoff. This is not a space for division or hostility. It's a space for humanity." The declaration hung in the air, electric and undeniable. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the weight of her ultimatum pressing down on them. Sarah's face flushed crimson, her earlier bravado crumbling under the collective scrutiny of the cabin. She glanced around nervously, searching for support, but found only disapproving stares. One man muttered under his breath, "Good luck explaining that to corporate." For several long seconds no one moved. Then, slowly, a single passenger rose from their seat, a middle-aged man wearing an expensive watch and a scowl. Without a word, he grabbed his carry-on and marched toward the exit, his footsteps echoing sharply against the silence. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving the rest of the passengers to sit in stunned stillness. At that moment, Malcolm locked eyes with Captain Torres. Though neither spoke, the connection was palpable, a shared understanding of what it meant to stand firm in the face of injustice. He nodded almost imperceptibly, gratitude swelling in his chest. This wasn't just about vindication. It was about being seen, truly seen as more than the sum of society's assumptions. Meanwhile, Sarah hesitated, visibly torn between pride and shame. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again, her hands trembling slightly, in her lap. The realization seemed to dawn on her. She couldn't win this battle without losing herself in the process. Defeat etched itself onto her features, and she sank back into her seat, avoiding eye contact with anyone. As the plane prepared for departure, the mood in the cabin shifted subtly. Conversations resumed, quieter now but tinged with reflection. A young woman leaned over to Malcolm, her voice soft but sincere. "Thank you for handling that with such grace," she said. "It's inspiring." Others echoed similar sentiments, their words weaving a fragile yet hopeful sense of unity. Malcolm sat back in his seat, exhaling slowly. He knew this moment wouldn't erase the years of prejudice he'd endured, nor would it dismantle the systemic barriers that persisted. But it was a start, a crack in the foundation of indifference and exclusion. And sometimes all it took was one crack to let the light shine through. As the plane soared above the clouds, Malcolm stared out the window, watching the world shrink below him. The vast expanse of blue sky stretched endlessly, mirroring the quiet determination he felt within. He replayed the events of the past hour in his mind. The tension, the confrontation, Captain Torres's intervention, and realized something profound. This wasn't just about one flight or one moment. It was a microcosm of the larger fight for dignity and equality that so many faced every day. He thought about the passenger who had chosen to leave, the ripple effect of that decision resonating far beyond the confines of the cabin. It was a reminder that solidarity mattered, that choosing to stand with someone even silently could make all the difference. And yet, he also thought about Sarah, her discomfort palpable as she sat rigidly beside him. She hadn't apologized, but her silence spoke volumes. Perhaps in time she might reflect on her actions and see them for what they were, a reflection of biases she hadn't yet confronted. The hum of conversation around him softened into a gentle murmur. Passengers who had earlier defended him now exchanged stories of their own struggles with discrimination. A young black woman seated nearby shared how she'd been mistaken for catering staff at a corporate event. An elderly Asian man recounted being asked where he was really from, despite living in the country for decades. Each story added layers to the collective narrative, weaving threads of pain, resilience, and hope into the fabric of the moment. Malcolm listened intently, nodding along, feeling both heartbroken and heartened by the shared humanity unfolding before him. When the plane finally touched down in London, Malcolm disembarked with a renewed sense of purpose. Over the next few days, he found himself reflecting deeply on the incident. He realized that while staying composed during the confrontation had been important, it was equally vital to share his experience, to amplify its message beyond the walls of the aircraft. Sitting at his laptop late one night, he began typing. "I never imagined I'd face racism in first class," he wrote, his words flowing steadily as if releasing pent-up emotions. He described the encounter with Sarah, the support from strangers, and Captain Torres's powerful intervention. What struck me most wasn't the prejudice itself. It was the courage of those who stood against it. Their voices reminded me that none of us are alone in this fight. He posted the piece online, unsure of what kind of response to expect. Within hours, it went viral. Comments poured in from people around the world sharing their own stories, thanking him for putting words to feelings they'd long struggled to articulate. News outlets picked up the story, highlighting not only the incident, but also the broader issues of systemic racism and bias in public spaces. For the first time in years, Malcolm felt like more than an individual navigating personal challenges. He felt like part of a movement. Inspired by the overwhelming response, the airline took action. They announced mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, emphasizing the importance of creating inclusive environments for passengers and staff alike. Posters featuring diverse faces appeared in terminals worldwide, accompanied by slogans like, "Everyone belongs here." Captain Torres became a prominent advocate for diversity initiatives in aviation, using her platform to push for policy changes that prioritized equity and representation. Months later, Malcolm returned to the same airport for another international flight. As he walked through the terminal, he noticed subtle shifts: the posters, the friendlier demeanor of the staff, the absence of lingering glances that once made him question his place. When he boarded the plane, familiar flight attendants greeted him warmly, remembering him from before. One even said, "We're glad to have you back, Mr. Rivers." Settling into his seat, Malcolm allowed himself a small smile. He knew the work wasn't done. There would always be new battles to fight, new minds to change. But progress was undeniable. Small acts of courage, like standing firm in the face of prejudice or speaking up when it mattered most, could create ripples that transformed lives and systems alike. As the plane ascended into the sky once again, Malcolm closed his eyes, letting the hum of the engines lull him into a peaceful calm. Somewhere between the clouds and the earth below, he carried a quiet hope that one day, everyone would truly belong. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to support more impactful narratives that challenge societal norms and inspire change. Together, we can amplify voices that matter and continue the conversation about equality, resilience, and justice. Your engagement makes a difference. Let's build bridges, one story at a time.